call came in at 7:40 in the morning, which meant I was already 20 minutes late getting out the door. My uncle's contact, a property manager named Doug, said it like he was doing me a favor. Big house in Westmount, owner needed someone fast. Outdoor lighting panel had tripped the whole breaker on the east side of the property, and their usual electrician was 3 hours away in the townships. Could I be there by 9? I said yes before I asked what the job actually was, which is a habit I have not managed to break. I knew the address before I looked it up. Everybody in the city knew that house, or at least knew who lived in it. Margot Ellery, the kind of name that showed up in the Gazette's lifestyle section, on the back of fundraising programs for the Orchestre Symphonique, at the end of CBC segments about women reshaping Canadian media. She had built a production company from something small into something that won awards I had actually heard of. Magazine profiles called her visionary. The ones written by people who did not like her called her relentless. Either way, she was not the kind of person who usually needed my number. The house sat behind a stone wall on a street so quiet you could hear your own footsteps. I rang at the gate and a woman's voice came through the intercom, clipped and already moving. Trades entrances on the side. Go around. There was no hello. The lighting panel was mounted in a utility alcove off the north garden, half hidden behind a cedar hedge that had grown too close to the wall over the years. I could see the problem before I even opened the cover. One of the outdoor fixture lines had developed a slow ground fault. Probably water getting into a junction box over the winter. Every time the system tried to cycle on, it tripped. The panel itself's fine. The fault was somewhere along the east garden run. Maybe 40 feet of conduit buried under flagstone. I was still crouching there mapping the circuit when I heard gravel shift behind me. How bad is it? I turned. She was standing about 6 feet back, hands in the pockets of a dark wool coat, bare feet in garden clogs, like she had come straight out of the house without thinking about it. No assistant beside her, no phone in her hand. Just her looking at the panel like it had personally disappointed her. I had seen photographs. This was not that. The photographs showed a woman composed for an audience. This was something else entirely. Tired in a way that sat behind her eyes and did not move when she noticed me noticing. Ground fault on the east run, I said. The panel's fine. I need to find where water got in. Can you find it today? Probably. She looked at the hedge then back at the panel. The event is Saturday. I need everything working by Friday afternoon. What day is it today? She gave me a look that was not quite a smile. Wednesday. Then yeah, today. She nodded once, turned and walked back toward the house. 3 steps away she stopped without turning around. There's coffee in the kitchen if you need it. Tell whoever answers the door that Margot said. Then she was gone. I spent the morning working backward through the East Garden circuit, pulling inspection covers off junction boxes one by one, until I found the one that had cracked along the lid seal over winter. Water had pooled inside, corroded one of the wire nuts, and left just enough resistance to confuse the breaker. 45 minutes of careful work. The fix itself took less time than finding it. When I tested the line, every fixture on the east side came up clean. I was packing the inspection covers back into place when one of the house staff came out and told me Margot wanted to know if I could look at something in the boathouse before I left. There was no boathouse visible from where I was standing. I said sure. The property ran further than the front suggested, past the main garden, past a lower terrace with a covered outdoor kitchen, down a slope that opened onto a private dock on the water. The boathouse sat at the end of it, old stone with a newer roof, probably the original carriage house from before the city grew around the neighborhood. Margot was already there, standing in the doorway. The exterior light hasn't worked since October, she said. I kept meaning to have someone look. The fixture was the easy part. The socket had oxidized, the seal had gone, same winter damage story. I had a replacement in the truck that was close enough. 15 minutes. She did not leave while I worked. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and looked out at the water. The St. Lawrence was gray and wide and flat that morning, and on the far shore Quebec's south bank sat low under a colorless sky. It was a view worth standing still for. You've been doing this long? She asked, not looking at me. Since I was about 16, did jobs with my uncle. Then on my own after. Do you like it? I thought about that for a second, which surprised me because it is not usually a question that needs thinking. Yeah, I said. I like problems that have actual answers. She looked at me then. Something shifted in her expression, not much but enough. What a thing to like, she said like she meant it. That was the first time she stayed in a conversation past the point where she needed to. I finished the fixture, tested it twice, wrote up the invoice on my phone and sent it before I had even gotten back to the truck. Professional habit. On the way out I passed the kitchen window and the staff member from earlier waved at me through the glass, like I was already someone she recognized. Doug called that afternoon. Margot's office had called him. Could I come back Thursday to look at the landscape lighting on the West Terrace? They had an event Saturday and wanted everything checked. I said yes. Again before I asked. Thursday I was there by 8:30. The West Terrace fixtures were straightforward. Just aging transformers running low voltage. One of them underperforming enough that the run looked dim compared to the others. I swapped 2 transformers, recalibrated the timer, and had everything balanced before noon. Margot appeared around 10, again without announcement. This time with a mug of tea in both hands and that same coat. She stood at the terrace railing and looked at the garden below while I worked, and after a while she started talking. Not at me specifically, or at least it didn't feel that way. Just talking, like she was thinking out loud and I happened to be there. The caterers want to set up here, she said, meaning the terrace. I told them the west side gets too much wind off the water by 7. They don't believe me because they've never been here at 7. Have you told them that? I've told them twice. Tell them 3 times with a weather app open. She turned to look at me, that almost smile again, sharper this time. She stayed another 20 minutes. When she left she took the empty mug I had set on the railing by mistake, and brought it inside without saying anything about it. The event Saturday was a fundraiser for a literacy foundation she chaired. I know that because I drove past the house on my way to another job and saw the catering vans and the valets and the string of dark sedans pulling up along the street. I did not slow down. On Monday she called me directly. Not Doug, not the office, her. I was under a kitchen sink in Verdun when my phone rang and the name on the screen was just a number I didn't know, but the voice I knew immediately. The dock lighting failed Friday night, she said. Half of it. No one noticed until after the guests arrived. What time did it fail? Around 8. Did the breaker trip, or did it just go dark? A pause. I'll have to check. Does it matter? If the breaker tripped, same fault as before somewhere in the dock run. If it just went dark, it's probably the transformer timer. Another pause. Shorter. I'll have someone check. I can come Tuesday. Come Tuesday. That was how I started spending 4 then 5 days a week at that house. No official arrangement, no contract. Just a revolving list of things that needed attention. A breaker that tripped in the service panel every time both ovens ran at once. Landscape lights on the lower terrace that went out in the rain, because the fixture covers weren't rated for real Quebec winters. A motion sensor on the north garden wall that had been pointing at a cedar branch for 2 years and triggered every time the wind picked up. Small things. The kind of list old houses generate constantly. By the second week the kitchen staff knew my name. One of them, a man called Pierre who handled most of the house operations, started leaving me a coffee at the utility alcove in the mornings without being asked. I didn't think much about what that meant until one of the security team asked me, too casually, how long I planned to be around. Until the list is done, I said. He gave me a nod that meant he had already made his own calculation about that. Margot and I fell into something unplanned. She was never where I expected her to be, which meant she was often where I was. One morning I was in the boathouse replacing a ceiling fixture, and she came in carrying a folder of documents, set them on the workbench beside my tools without a word, started reading. An hour passed like that. She reading, me working, both of us quiet. When I finished and started packing up, she looked up and said, "Do you want lunch?" Like it was the most obvious question in the world. We ate at the kitchen island. Pierre made sandwiches and disappeared with the discretion of someone who had learned when not to be in a room. Margot ate half of hers and read something on her phone. I ate all of mine and looked out at the garden. It was not awkward, that was the strange part. "How do you know what something's worth fixing versus replacing?" she asked, still looking at her phone. "Usually cost," I said. "But sometimes it's just whether the thing is worth keeping." She set the phone down. "That's not an electrical principle." "No." She looked at me for a moment with something thoughtful in her expression. Then she picked up her phone again. "Fair enough." I found out later from Pierre that she almost never ate lunch with anyone. Not assistants, not colleagues, not friends passing through. She ate alone or she did not eat. He said it without editorializing, just as a fact, but he also said it in a way that meant he had noticed the change. I should have paid more attention to that. The first thing that made me uneasy happened on a Thursday in early April. I was finishing up in the East Garden when I saw a man with a long lens standing on the public path along the waterfront below. The property line ended at the stone retaining wall, and below that was technically accessible, a waterfront trail that ran along the whole stretch of shore. He was not moving, he was just standing there, lens up, pointed toward the upper terrace. I kept working. 20 minutes later he was still there. I mentioned it to Pierre, who said something brief in French that I understood without needing translation and went inside to make a call. That evening Margot found me in the utility room. "There was a photographer on the path today," she said. "I saw him." "What were you working on when he was there?" "East Garden fixture covers." She exhaled through her nose. So he got the back of someone in a work jacket, basically. She rubbed 2 fingers across her forehead. Okay, then, like she was deciding something. Thank you for not reacting. I hadn't thought to react, but I nodded. After that, I started noticing things I had been too busy to see before. The way the house felt different when there were more staff around. How Margot moved through shared spaces quickly, efficiently, without pause. But in the private parts of the property, the boathouse, the lower terrace, the kitchen at off hours, she moved differently. Slower. More like herself, whatever that meant. There were evenings she asked me to stay and finish something after the rest of the house had quieted down. A thermostat in the upstairs hallway that needed recalibrating. Exterior sensors to reset. Things that did not need to be done at 7 in the evening but somehow were. I stayed because I wanted to. That was the honest version. One night we were in the boathouse again. Windows fogged a little from the cold coming off the water. A small space heater I had fixed 2 weeks earlier running in the corner. She had brought a glass of wine and a second one that she set near me without asking if I wanted it. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not about the house. About her company, and a deal that had gone wrong the previous autumn in a way she was still untangling. About my uncle, who had taught me every useful thing I knew before his back gave out. About growing up in different parts of the same country, and how that made you almost the same person, and almost a completely different one. At some point, the space between us on the old wooden bench had gotten smaller without either of us noting when. She said, I don't usually talk this much. I know, I said, and then immediately felt strange for saying it like that. Like I knew her well enough to know. She looked at me sideways. Pierre told you. Pierre didn't have to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that's either a good thing or a problem. Probably both. She turned toward me then. Not all the way, just enough, and the look on her face was not the composed version. Not the one for fundraisers and CBC profiles. Not the one she wore when staff were in the room. It was the tired, honest, unguarded one. The one I had seen the very first morning at the gate and hadn't been able to stop thinking about since. I kissed her first. I want to be accurate about that. She put one hand against my jaw like she was making sure of something. Then she kissed me back. After that, everything got more careful and more complicated, and in the hours that were just hours, considerably less complicated than anything I had felt in years. We did not get reckless. If anything, we became almost excessively careful. I came later in the evenings, left by the lower gate that opened onto the waterfront path instead of the main entrance. The boathouse became the place without us ever deciding that. Warm light from the space heater. Voices low without thinking about it. Hours that felt nothing like the rest of either of our lives. She told me once, lying on her side reading something on her phone while I looked at the ceiling, that the last relationship she had been in had ended because the man could not tolerate being less visible than she was. She said it flatly, without much emotion, like a fact she had processed long ago. I said, that sounds exhausting. She looked up at me. All of it, caring about that. Being with someone who cared about that. She was quiet for a moment. You don't care about it at all, do you? It was not quite a question. I thought about it anyway. I care about the work, I said. I care about whether the thing is fixed right. I don't care who sees me doing it. She set the phone face down on the bench. That's the first time that's felt like a good quality in a very long time. The close calls started in May. The first one was small. I was leaving the property by the lower gate late, and a woman walking a dog on the path looked up at me and then at the gate, and then back at me with the particular expression of someone filing something away. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The second one was worse. A Wednesday evening, both of us in the boathouse, the small table lamp on, the windows dark outside. Margot went still mid-sentence and said very quietly, don't move. I did not move. Through the near window, barely visible, a light source was swinging slowly along the dock. Security flashlight. Pierre doing rounds. He tried the boathouse door, which was latched from the inside, paused, tried again. Then the light swung away and we heard his steps retreat up the stone path toward the main house. Margot exhaled very carefully. Does he always do rounds? I asked. Not usually this late. She reached for her wine and her hand was perfectly steady, which somehow made the moment feel more serious, not less. I'll have to adjust the schedule. I looked at her. You shouldn't have to do that. She met my eyes. I know. That was the first time either of us came close to saying what was obvious but not yet said. The item appeared online in the 3rd week of May. A blind item in a media gossip column, the kind of thing that has no names but has enough details to be worse than names. A well-known Montreal media figure. A younger man seen repeatedly at a private residential property. Something more than professional. The columnist called it cozy without any apparent sense of irony. Margot sent me the link in a text with no comment attached. I called her instead of texting back. She picked up on the second ring. How specific is it? I asked. Specific enough that someone who knows me will recognize it. Not specific enough for a reporter to run with. Does that matter? She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It's a timer, she said. Someone is deciding how much this is worth to them. I did not know what to say to that. She did not seem to need me to say anything. 2 days later, the property manager of the residential complex I lived in mentioned, entirely too casually, that someone had called the building asking about one of the tenants. He was not sure who. He thought I should know. I sat with that for an evening. The thing about being in someone else's world when that world runs on visibility is that you start to understand, really understand, what it costs to be seen at the wrong time in the wrong way. Not in an abstract sense. In the sense of a phone call to a building you have lived in for 3 years. In the sense of a flashlight on a dock at 11 at night. In the sense of a woman who moves differently in private than she does in public, because she has learned that public is never fully off. I had not understood that cost when I drove up to that gate in March. I understood it in May. I told Margot about the building manager when I saw her Thursday. She listened without interrupting, standing very still near the kitchen counter. That's not about the story, she said when I finished. That's someone checking whether there's a story. Same thing, isn't it? No, she said quietly. One is journalism, the other is leverage. I looked at her. I wanted to say something that would make it smaller than it was. I could not find the sentence. I have a colleague, she said, who keeps saying I should be more careful about what I let into this house. She looked at the window. He doesn't mean the lighting system. I understood what she was not saying. I also understood that she was not asking me to do anything, which somehow made it harder. I left that evening by the main gate because Pierre was doing the lower rounds again and the main gate was cleaner. On my way out I passed one of the regular security team, a quiet man called Bryce who had never said much to me beyond hello. He said hello. Then he said, "You're up late," with a tone that carried exactly as much extra weight as it needed to. I drove home on Sherbrooke with all the windows down even though it was too cold for that and thought about what kind of situation I was actually in. The answer came on a Friday, which felt appropriately blunt. An old contact from a restoration project I had worked on 3 years ago called about a position on a heritage properties maintenance team in Victoria, BC, full-time, benefits. The kind of structured work I had told myself I wanted for years. He needed an answer in a week. The timing was so clean it almost seemed arranged, which I knew it wasn't, but the feeling stayed anyway. I told Margot in the boathouse that same evening. No rehearsal, just the facts, the call, the job, Victoria, a week to decide. She sat with it for a long moment. She had a tea in both hands and she looked down at it for most of that moment. That's a good opportunity, she said finally. I waited. The heritage preservation work is good in Victoria, she said. The city takes it seriously. I looked at her. That's what you want to say? She looked up. Her eyes were steady and honest and tired in that same way they had been the first morning. But now I knew what lived behind the tired. What do you want me to say? I did not have a clean answer. I think she already knew I didn't. If you stay, she said, it becomes something we can't manage quietly. And I can't, she stopped. Tried again. There are things I have built that I cannot afford to have turned into a 3-week story. That's not about you. It's not a measure of what this has been. I know. She looked at me for a long time. Do you? I thought about it properly. About what it would mean to stay past the point where staying was still possible. The phone calls. The photographers on the path. The colleague who had already issued a warning, she had to pretend, was about the lighting system. The blind item that was still sitting, waiting for whoever held it to decide what it was worth. Yeah, I said. I do, she nodded once, very small. The last evening I came to the house was the following Monday. Most of the staff had gone home. Pierre was there, but he did not say much. The boathouse felt different that night. Not bad, just already a little past tense. We did not try to make it into something bigger than it was. She told me she was glad it had been me. She said it exactly like that, and it landed in a way no more complicated version of it would have. I said, I fixed things and didn't fill the silence. She smiled, and it was the real one, the one that was a little tired and a little dry and entirely genuine. That's almost everything. Before I left, she handed me a thermos of coffee, which seemed like her version of saying something she didn't have a word for. I took it without making it into a moment. The drive back the city was long in the way drives get when you don't want them to end. Victoria was already becoming real in my head. New property, new city, different scale of work. The kind of thing I had said I was building toward. The gate behind me closed clean and quiet. I thought about the first morning. The call at 7:40, the panel behind the cedar hedge. The woman with bare feet in garden clogs, who had said go around and meant it but stayed anyway. I thought about what she said in the boathouse that last night, the thing that sat in me harder than anything dramatic could have. Not that she was sorry. Not that it couldn't work. Just, I'm glad it was you. I kept the thermos for a long time after.